Congressman Dan Goldman of New York is a former federal prosecutor, and he joins me now. Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time this evening. Let me just start by getting your reaction to what we're hearing from this witness. I mean, we knew the details before, but it is different to hear him on camera, I think. How valuable is what he's saying to prosecutors in this case, in your view?
Oh, Brian Butler, I think, is going to be important because he's going to provide really a lot of corroboration to so much of the other evidence. He is going to be able to narrate a little bit of all of the obstruction of justice. He is going to talk about Walt Nauta asking very odd questions about the surveillance tapes. There are a lot of little nooks and crannies that he's going to fill in, and he clearly is quite open and honest about what he saw, what his role was, and he did it unwittingly, it appears. But I think it'll be a powerful and credible witness for the prosecution.
I'm guessing you wouldn't recommend key witnesses doing television interviews who are going to be used by the prosecution. But given this is delayed, I mean, he worked there for 20 years. He seems willing to go out there and talk about what he's seen. I'm asking you now to put your political hat on. How important do you think this is in terms of the telling of the story of what happened in this case?
Yeah, look, I certainly spent 10 years as a prosecutor where I did not want a witness to say anything to anyone else because you just don't want to create more of a record where small missteps or small different details could trip you up. In this case, where Donald Trump's only defense is in the court of public opinion, I think that it is very important for Brian Butler and other witnesses to come forward publicly to explain what they know and what their role is. We are going to need to have Brian Butlers and former Trump cabinet secretaries and former Trump intelligence officials and former Trump national security officials. Everybody is going to need to come out and publicly explain why Donald Trump is such a risk to our democracy, to our national security, and to our global security. And by Brian Butler doing this, this takes a tremendous amount of courage because he will get a serious amount of vitriol, threats most likely that many of us get, but he's otherwise a private citizen and hasn't signed up for this. So this is a very bold and admirable, courageous move by Mr. Butler.
This is quite a news week, I think, as we all know. Hur is testifying tomorrow, and I was curious your take on what the Democratic strategy should be there. It's clear from reporting the Republicans want to bring up the age issue again. They want to ask why Biden wasn't also, treated the same way in their view as Trump. Ludicrous. But what do you think the Democrats should do here?
Well, look, I'm a little concerned that he resigned the day before, that he's been prepping apparently with Trump orbit people. He was appointed by Donald Trump. And the reason I'm concerned about that is that if he were still an employee of the Department of Justice, he would be obligated to adhere to the rules, regulations, and restrictions placed upon him by the Department of Justice. Now, as a private citizen, he does not have those same obligations. And it's passing strange that he would resign the night before or the day before his public testimony as a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who was then appointed to be special counsel by Merrick Garland. And he's being prepped by Trump officials or Trump associates. Then this feels much more political than a special counsel should otherwise be. And frankly, that's what I saw in his entire report. Not just about the gratuitous age references, not just about his editorializing about Joe Biden writing books because he thought he was presidential material, which is purely subjective editorializing by the special counsel. But as a former prosecutor, that report does not contain the factual basis to make the conclusions that he makes, even though he decided not to charge Joe Biden because he would never be able to prove that case to a jury. He impugned him by using the same language in the statute, by willfully retaining classified information is what he said, which is what the law prohibits. So he didn't charge him, but he said he did the conduct, and the evidence that he recounts does not support that. So I think there'll be a couple things that the Democrats Democrats hit on. I hope some of my colleagues will hit upon that. Many, of course, will hit upon the gratuitous editorializing. But also, he violated a number of DOJ rules and regulations in opining about things that are unrelated to his core task, which was to determine whether or not Joe Biden violated any criminal laws and should be indicted. And there's a good reason why you speak in indictments and not in reports like this, because there's no way for Joe Biden to cross-examine him, to cross-examine witnesses, or in any way to defend himself against these accusations. So I'm looking forward to my colleagues, all of whom on the Judiciary Committee really know their stuff. They're gonna challenge him, I hope, and expect on a number of different things in that report.
One to watch. Lots of questions out there. You kind of alluded to about what exactly Hur's aspirations are. I guess we will see. Congressman Dan Goldman, thank you as always for joining me this evening.